and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine.
One day we will be remembered.
She took her kids to visit her husband, and then she came back to England, and she was pregnant again. Because that's basically why she went to visit her husband. I think she understood as much as he did that this was like an air game, and I mean, always be pregnant was kind of her thing too. It wasn't like he was forcing her to be pregnant all this time. She was in on it. She was like, yeah, we need as many kids as possible because you saw how that went with my first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And this time, he followed her. He came back to England. He found out she was pregnant, and he came to England. So he's like growing as a person. He's like, I'm going to be here for a baby that you have. So on September 8, 1157, Eleanor had her next baby, Prince Richard. And we know a lot about this baby because he's the future King Richard the First.
Mm-hmm.
Richard the Lionheart. And he's the one who infamously, tried to sell London to make the money to go on crusade.
Oh.
Meanwhile, in France, Eleanor's ex-husband, King Louis, had gotten remarried. And he had another daughter.
Oh, wah, wah.
He's like, I mean, tell me the problem without telling me the problem, Louis, because maybe it's you that God is trying to send a message to. So Henry thought, what if I marry my son to Louis's daughter, Marguerite of France, with the new wife? Because if it was the daughters with the old wife, they would not only be much older, but they'd also be half siblings, so that's not a good look.
Right.
But with the new wife, they're not related at all. So he's like, my son can marry your daughter. And then it looks like God's not really on your side, my guy. So if you never have sons, which I'm going to be honest, it's looking like God doesn't want you to, you'll have my son. And we can just unite our countries and you're welcome. That was basically the vibe.
Yeah, I saw that Henry married his mother's ex-husband's daughter, and I was like, oh, it's so awkward and weird.
So weird. Like, talk about, I mean, Christmas is already awkward because you got rapey brother-in-law over there.
Mm-hmm.
So you already have awkward Christmas. So maybe they were just like, oh, this is nothing. Like, we are a disaster. So why not add more to it?
It's kind of close.
It's a little awkward. So Henry left for France because his wife had her baby, and he's like, okay, well, that was overrated. I don't know that I need to be here for this. And he left for France again to set up this marriage. And when he left, she was 8 months pregnant. So Eleanor had her baby on the 23rd of September, 1158, Prince Geoffrey, which, can I just say, is that awkward? Because Geoffrey is the name of the brother-in-law that tried to kidnap her.
A little bit, yeah.
I feel like if the brother-in-law is all like, he almost kidnapped and raped me, you don't have to name your kid after him. And that's who this baby was named after. Gross. And she immediately went to France to find her husband because she wanted that tea. She was like ready to be pregnant again. And she spent 1159, the whole year, in France with her husband. So that's like new for them. I don't know that they've spent a whole year together. Usually she's pregnant and he's outie, and then they get back together a year later, but they spent all of 1159 together.
Okay.
She left for England in December. I wonder if they got in a fight.
Oh,
Because he didn't leave, she left, and I don't know. Maybe they got in a fight and she was like, I'm out of here. I'm going back to England.
If this is the longest that they've been together.
Oh, yeah. It's probably like when we were all locked down for COVID.
Nerves, or she found out he had a mistress.
Yes. And they stayed apart for 10 months.
Was she pregnant when she left?
No, she wasn't. That's also sus. And she only came back when he summoned her and his children to France.
Ah.
He was like, you and the kids, get over here now. I mean, he probably said it nicer than that. But I'm going with this whole fight theory. And he was like, I'm done with this argument. You and the children are coming here now. King Louis's second wife had died at this point. And she had also provided Louis with only 2 more daughters. So he's got 4 children now, all girls. He had to be in a down place. He had to be looking at this like this was God's judgment of him. Like, You burned all those people in that church. That was your last chance. And now you're not going to have a son. So
Yeah.
you're going to end your family line. And King Henry had by this point arranged for his son to marry the daughter of the king, because he was like, yeah, that's definitely going to happen. He's not having any boys. And it turns out that Louis wasn't totally on board with this marriage. King Henry had it done kind of on the down low. And he was like, I'm the king of England and basically the king of half of France. So you don't have a choice. And also, I'm banging your wife, your ex-wife. King Henry would kind of bully King Louis because King Louis was pious and quiet and very subtle and low-key. And King Henry was not. When he threw public tantrums, can't be that low-key.
He needed to get his way.
Exactly. Eleanor likely had a baby around this time. We think it's a boy named Philip. But the only reason we think that is because John Speed wrote A History of Great Britain in 1611, which, keep in mind, is 450 years after Queen Eleanor would have had this son.
Right.
He wrote that she had a son named Philip.
Right.
But whatever he found that gave us that information no longer exists, if it ever did.
Okay.
So he is the only source we have.
Okay.
But in 1161, Eleanor did have another baby that we know about named Eleanor.
Ah!
And I think she's probably lucky, like you said, that her name isn't Eleanor.
Right.
Henry II's reign was marred by a bitter feud with Thomas Becket, which began in 1163.
Will no one rid me of this troublesome
Right? They were like, they hated each other.
Well, they were good friends.
Until they weren't.
And Henry made him Archbishop of Canterbury.
Exactly,
is that correct?
Yes.
And then he thought he would be able to tell Thomas Becket what to do. But then Thomas Becket took his job seriously.
Yeah.
And that's what caused the rift, because he wouldn't do what Henry
And no one can hurt you like the people closest to you, right? Like,
right.
Your best friend betraying you, that's probably why they were like arch nemesis. You feel more betrayed when it's someone close to you.
Right.
And Eleanor, surprise, surprise, she's pregnant again. I bet you're shocked, right? Like, what? Eleanor? And again, you're going to be shocked. But Henry left his pregnant wife to go work in France. Because that's just their dynamic at this point. Like, she gets pregnant, he's like, okay, I did my job. Like, his job is the impregnating. Her job is having the baby. So he's going to go, he's a workaholic. Like I said earlier, his work is his life. And Eleanor joined him in the spring. She followed him. She was like, okay, you're going to leave? I'm going to go with you. Which, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who wants her to go with him on his business trips.
Just like Louis.
Exactly. She's a little clingy. She's like a clingy wife. She's like, I'm here, surprise. We know that this probably wasn't super appreciated because 2 weeks after she showed up, her husband left.
Oh.
He's like, oh, this was a good 2 weeks. I'm out again. And he left again. She's like, are you kidding me? I just came from England. What are you talking about? But she was about to have that baby, so he didn't want to be there, you know?
And this was Joan.
Yeah, she had Princess Joan. And they stayed apart for a long time. So maybe they had another fight.
Probably.
It's giving me fight. She was super pregnant. He was like, why are you here? She was probably like emotional. Like, what do you mean, why am I here? I'm trying to have your baby. That's how I imagine it. In my head, that's how it goes down. And they stayed apart long enough that when he met his daughter Joan, Joan was 5 months old.
Oh.
So it was a while. By this time, Louis VII, her first husband, had finally gotten a son from his third wife. He was like, oh my gosh, God forgave me. Thank goodness.
This would be Philip II.
Yes.
Finally, God loves me.
I know. And at this point, Eleanor needed help with her husband because there was potentially going to be a rebellion in Aquitaine. And she was like, hey, maybe the English army could help. But they had been spending so much time apart recently, which says a lot because they spent a lot of time apart, their whole marriage. So much time apart at this point that there were rumors. People were like, they're not getting along. This is obvious to everyone else too. And a lot of rumors that he was having affairs. He had mistresses. He had babies with other women. There was a lot of rumors going around.
Right.
And also
he had a famous mistress, too. Was it
Exactly.
Rosamond
Yes.
of Clifton or Clifford?
Yep. Yep. And she was hearing these rumors, and also she was pregnant, and then she went to see him, and then 2 weeks later he's like, bye. So she's probably believing all these rumors, I'm assuming. I believe them. So
Yeah.
I'm sure she did too. But Eleanor seemed pretty chill about his mistress. She was like, okay, yeah, you're a king. If you need to sleep with people that aren't me, that's fine. Just make sure you keep me pregnant. Like, as long as you keep me pregnant, I'm okay with you sleeping with other people.
Keep that uterus topped off.
Exactly. And they stayed apart until January of 1166. And we know that because she got pregnant again. So they were together long enough for her to get pregnant again. And she had her baby in December of that year. And that was Prince John. This was her last baby.
Okay.
And by this time, Henry's relationship with Rosamond Clifford had begun. It became public knowledge. So, like, it wasn't just the queen that suspected it now. Now it was like everyone knew this was the king's mistress.
Okay.
So Prince John was born on Christmas Eve. And at this point, his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was 42. So props to her. Because having a baby at 42 in the 12th century, advanced maternal age, but like plus because it's 1167. So they didn't spend Christmas together. And they didn't see each other until the following Christmas. So when he didn't see Joan until she was 5 months old, he didn't see John until he was a year old almost.
Wow.
The only reason she saw him was because Eleanor had to bring her daughter Matilda to marry the Duke of Saxony.
Okay.
And her daughter Matilda was 11.
Ooh.
Yeah. And the separation of Eleanor and Henry during the next 5 years has been the subject of much speculation as to whether it was predominantly a matter of political expediency or an indication of growing rift between the couple. So either she was like, look, I'm trying to run Aquitaine and you're trying to run England. We can't be together. We're bi-coastal, basically. Or they were like, I don't want to be with you.
And from what I understand, she was grooming Richard to become the Duke of Aquitaine at this time.
She was, because their oldest was going to be the King of England. And they were like, look, this is a lot of work. Like, well, why don't we do the Charlemagne thing and split it up? So he'll get your stuff, and Richard will be the next Duke of Aquitaine. And then they'll be brothers. They'll work together. They'll be in an alliance. But this is hard to just go back and forth all the time. So for a long time, writers dealing with this period stated that her court was the center of chivalry and troubadour culture. So that probably sounds familiar from her grandfather, right? She was like, this is the way I want to be. And this got even more so. She had her daughter Marie at court with her, and
she was able to come.
She was. She by this point she's an adult.
Okay.
So she gets to pick, and she's like, I'm gonna go hang out with my mom. And they presided over a court that was called the Court of Love. Okay. And basically, they only dealt with stuff that had to do with like lovers' disputes. It was sort of like divorce court in the 12th century.
Okay.
And they would hear out the drama, the lovers' drama, and then they would rule. And they'd be like, this is the ruling. And there's at least 21 cases of them doing this. And one of them specifically was the question of, can people who are married be in love? That was the question. Can you be in love if you're married? And the women of this court decided that it was not at all likely. So, so I think that tells us something maybe about Eleanor's marriage. If they're like, unlikely that if you're married, you are in love. But they didn't say it was impossible. Just that probably not. So I feel like the ladies of this court were like not in the happiest of marriages, but maybe that's why they were hanging out with their girl court, like their divorce court of the 12th century.
The marriages back then were marriages of convenience and
political arrangements. Yeah, a lot of contracts. And at this point, the only time that Eleanor seemed to be with her husband was when they were marrying off their children. They would get together with one of their kids, marry them off, because they were definitely doing the Queen Victoria thing. Like, let's get as much power as possible.
Yep. Spread those kids around Europe.
Right? That's why you have them. And her oldest son, who in theory was the younger king, but his dad wasn't giving him much power, was kind of being buttered up by his father-in-law, Eleanor's ex-husband, King Louis. Mm-hmm. There are suspicions that it was actually Eleanor who suggested that her oldest son get with her ex-husband. That she was like, oh, yeah, your dad's kind of a butt, but I had this other husband. He's also a king. He's a French king. And she was very much like a French girl, right? So
right.
She would have been like, he knows, he wasn't a good husband, but he knows how to king. So maybe go over there and see what he thinks. And Henry, the older King Henry, the father, didn't really notice that his son had left to Paris. His son's father-in-law had invited him and his daughter to Paris to discuss, family drama. And Henry just didn't really notice that his son was missing. So I think that says a lot about how much he was not letting his son rule. He didn't even notice he was gone.
Right.
And eventually, her other sons joined their brother because they were like, yeah, Dad's kind of a jerk. And the only one who remained with his father was Little John because he was only about 7 at the time.
Right. Well, and Richard was Eleanor's favorite.
Richard was Eleanor's favorite. And John was not his father's favorite until everyone rebelled and went over to the French king and was like, maybe we're like kind of French. And all of a sudden, John became his father's favorite at that point. And before that, he didn't have any land. He didn't have much of anything. And that's when he started to get land. And his brother was a little resentful of that. His brother was like...
Was he John Lackland?
He was. John Sansterre, which is John Lackland. So he got some land, but his brothers were kind of resentful. Like, why does John get land? He's just a baby, basically. You should give it to us. They didn't want their father to do that whole Charlemagne thing where he split everything up. Because, I mean, honestly, it didn't really work great for Charlemagne, right? Like, that caused more problems because then they could all fight. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I thought it was fair. I think Charlemagne had a good idea. Like, split it up and here you go.
Yeah.
But back then, it was more traditional, just give everything to your oldest son, which, as the oldest, I can say I approve. But, but I get why no one else would think that was a good idea.
And as an only, I don't like to share.
Right? You're like, I'm getting it anyway. So at this point, King Henry was kind of mad because he could tell that his sons were going to rebel. He could tell that they were becoming more French and that his wife was 100% in favor of it. And he tried to convince his wife to become a nun. He was just like, hey, so you don't really seem interested in this queen thing. Why don't you be a nun? And then problem solved.
Any more kids.
Right, so. Right. And then he could go, like he had that mistress. Mm-hmm. Just like, okay, well, let's put you away. And she was like, no, I don't want to do that.
Because remember, she still had a duchy to run.
Right. And she was more powerful. When they got married, like he might be king now, but I feel like thanks to her, she was more powerful when they got married.
Yep.
So like, how ungrateful to just be like, okay, well, I got what I needed, all those kids and a whole country. Now go be a nun. Go away. Because now you can't have more kids. So I've had enough with you. I have no more use for you.
You're inconvenient to me.
Right. Yeah. And I'd say good for her. Good for her. Because, I don't know, that does not sound... She's a badass. She can't just go hide in a nunnery somewhere.
Right. Something else I read was that she did have her duchy. She wanted to rule it. But Henry II, her husband, kept undermining her rule and giving away parts of her land.
Yeah. Because he didn't think it was as important. He was... Yeah. If he could... it was like his children, right? If he could use it to make his position stronger. But remember, he's the guy who throws the fits. So,
yeah.
Do we really expect anything else from him? So at this point, John was living with his father. Richard and Geoffrey were living with their mother, but they were kind of on the side of their brother, Henry, the younger king. And so there was like a French faction and English faction. And so Eleanor sent those sons to be with their brother and her ex-husband. She was like, go have a mentor in my ex-husband. He'll teach you how to be a better king than your father. And she encouraged all her vassals in Aquitaine to support her sons. This is the move. You have to follow my sons because my husband is on his way out. He's not He's not going to be the guy. You want to follow my sons, and then you'll have power.
Right.
And Eleanor would then also head out to Paris. So she was definitely in on it to some degree because she was like, yeah, I'm going to go see this guy too. But she was seized on the road to Paris and taken to her husband, King Henry.
She was in disguise in men's clothes.
Yeah, because she
And
was
that
like, he wants
was scandalous.
Yes. Well, because she gets kidnapped every other second, or at least attempted. She's like, I'll just be a dude. Dudes don't get kidnapped. And the king did not announce her arrest publicly, which is alarming. Because that's your safety, right? She's basically just missing in action at this point.
Right.
And so you probably won't word out like, hey, this is where I am if I don't come back. Maybe something's wrong. But he had her confined and her whereabouts were unknown. She was moved around a bit. Most of her children were in France with her ex-husband, which is such a weird dynamic. I can't imagine sending your kids to your ex-husband. I mean, he was a good guy. He loved her. He treated her well. I mean, it's all relative, right? Like, he did force her to leave her uncle's house that one time, but, like, that was normal then. And she's used to being kidnapped, so that she's probably like, same old, it's a Tuesday for me. And her baby, 7-year-old John, remained with his father. And the forces of young Henry and Louis VII, Eleanor's ex-husband, invaded Normandy because that was her husband's French land. And they were like, well, let's start there. Let's start with getting all of this French land back because between Normandy and Aquitaine, I mean, Aquitaine was hers, but there was a lot of land not on the King of France's side. But this invasion of Normandy ended up in kind of a tie. Nobody won. Winter hit, and they were just like, there's a lot of work. It's hard to win during winter.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a tie. But then Henry, after the winter, so that winter they were like, let's just have a truce for winter. After winter, Henry entered Poitiers, which is in Aquitaine. And he took his daughter Joanna, together with other noble ladies, back to his stronghold in Normandy. So he basically invaded Poitiers and was like, you guys are coming with me. He's trying to collect all his people back. So more kidnapping, because that's what we do. And Henry... Oh, and so Henry was like facing an invasion. France was going to invade England. And he took a ship and sailed with Eleanor, his wife, John, Joanna, and the other ladies that he had just kidnapped from Aquitaine. And took them to an unknown place of confinement. So took them all to hiding. He was gathering up his family and putting them in captive hiding, which isn't a great look. I'd be mad.
A little bit.
Henry was the winner, actually, of this war. So even though all his sons and his wife's ex-husband and his wife were all against him, he was the war guy. He was good at war. So, and he was like, at this point, he was pretty mad. And he was considering divorce from his wife because he was like, okay, that was the final straw. You can't just rebel. That's uncalled for.
Yeah.
And his reasoning was going to be that they were related because it worked for her
Cousins.
in her first marriage, and they're more related than she was to her first husband. So he's like, consanguinity, we're related, remember? But I call BS. They knew they were related when they got married. You can't just be like, oh, and by the way, that's messed up.
Yeah.
And he again tried to get her to
I think
be
that
in
was just always a convenient excuse.
Yeah, for
Because all
sure.
the royals and nobles were related somehow.
Right? That was their get out of jail free card. I can put this in my back pocket and I can use it if my wife ever decides to stage a rebellion.
Yes.
So he tried to convince her to be a nun again, and she was like, no, I'm not going to do that, which, can I just say, ballsy. At this point, you're in captivity. Your husband has you basically captured. You are not free to leave. You are not even sure that you're going to be alive.
Right.
And you're just like, no, I'm not going to do it. So I think I might have been a nun. I might have been like, okay, fine. I'll go live at the nunnery.
I don't know. She grew up with such extravagance, but as a nun, you have to give all that up.
That's true. And she liked the troubadour and the courtly love and the whole, all the fancy stuff.
Fashion and...
Yeah. Maybe I'd just say, okay, I'll go be a nun. And then I'll like sneak away dressed as a man. I don't know.
After the rebellion was broken, Henry II forgave his sons, but he, like you said, he locked her, Eleanor, away and to never see Aquitaine again.
Yes.
As far as he was concerned. And then he wrote a will, and he did not include her in it.
Yeah, he blamed her for everything. He was like, okay, my sons are stupid, but it was their mom's fault.
Right. Because I believe Richard and Geoffrey were only 15 and 14 respectively at that time.
Yes, they were quite young. And he was a little more angry at Henry, but also dumb kid. So he definitely blamed his wife. And Eleanor was locked up. She was not getting out.
Right.
So I guess, I mean, if that's your deal, locked up in castle house arrest or a nun, I guess I'm going to go with castle house. Maybe she was just sure. I mean, she is the cougar that he fell in love with. So maybe she's just like, he's not going to kill me. Like, I'll just live in this castle. Like, I can't leave, so what? It's not the worst prison.
She can bide her time.
Yes, and she did. So we do know in the summer of 1176, Eleanor was at Winchester with Joanna, and Joanna was then 11, so she was in house arrest with her mother.
Okay.
And there were plans to marry her to William II of Sicily, and she was sent there, and the marriage took place on the 13th of February, 1177, when she was just 11.
Ooh.
These ages are crazy to me.
Didn't Matilda get married at 11 as well?
Yeah, it's just like, even then, like 12 was supposed to be the minimum age you could get married.
And he was 23.
That is so gross.
So
I'm sure it was, okay, let's just say it was a political marriage, I'm sure. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt that this was just a contract, hopefully. Because, ew, like 11. That's a fourth grader.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when I got my first retainer, in the fourth grade. Sad. And her son John was betrothed to Isabella of Gloucester. She was 3 years old. I mean, he was still a child too, so this wasn't like a marriage. They were two children, right? But 3 years old. That's insane. And Princess Eleanor left for Castile, and she was married to Alfonso VIII. And Geoffrey was married to Constance of Brittany. So basically, they're just marrying their kids to every powerful family in Europe.
Right.
And Eleanor, this whole time, remained confined. She was not strictly a prisoner, but she was under house arrest. She couldn't leave when she wanted to. She couldn't even go out riding when she wanted to, although it is likely she was able to get out and about because eventually, spoiler alert, eventually she does get out, and her health remained pretty fair during this time.
Okay.
So it's likely she got out to get exercise and things. So she was treated well, other than being on house arrest. But
Well, I mean, she was still the queen.
yeah. But I mean, queens go missing. Ever heard of Anne Boleyn? Like, stuff goes down. Kings can be crazy, especially when they're named Henry. Her oldest son, Henry, would actually end up dying of dysentery.
June 11th, 1183.
Yes. And so her husband lost his heir.
He may have made a deathbed request that Eleanor's imprisonment be reduced.
Yes, I did hear that. He was like, just please don't kill my mom. Let her out, maybe. Let her have some freedom. Yeah. Because she was always on his side. Like she had her kids back for sure. She was definitely on their side. And maybe didn't always give them the best advice. But also maybe they
your father
did. Yeah, he was just like, oh. So Henry, at this point, the king, was like, okay, well, that's too far. He didn't let her communicate with them. And he was worried that she would communicate with her children and they would just rebel again.
Right.
So he wouldn't let them talk. And even with Richard, who was her heir in Aquitaine, who had always been her favorite, she didn't get to speak to them. She didn't get to write to them. She didn't get to see them very often at all during her imprisonment. But then, in 1176, Rosamund Clifford died, the mistress of her husband.
Ooh.
So, I mean, I don't want to be a bee, but good riddance, Rosamund, because I'm Team Eleanor all the way. And I'm sure it's not Rosamund's fault, right? This is Henry's fault for sure. But
right.
So then word on the street is that Henry started a new affair with 16-year-old Alice of France.
Oh, no.
Right?
Wasn't that Richard's betrothed? Wasn't he betrothed to Alice?
Yeah. So she was betrothed to his son Richard and was also the daughter of Eleanor's ex-husband Louis VII.
It's also weird.
Right? And King Louis was alarmed at this news. He was like, wait a minute, no, I don't think so.
First you take my ex-wife and then you take my daughter?
Oh, I would be so mad if I was Louis. And remember, he's this super religious guy who's like, God finally loves me again. And now everyone's just stealing all my women.
Oh my goodness.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.